Teachers, how easy is it to tell a student has a crush? My son who is 5 has a crush on a 6-year-old at his school. She says she loves him too, and she is around him all the time. He told me just yesterday that he wants to build a 3-bedroom house with a room for him, a room for her, and a room for the baby they are going to have. I asked if he did not want to share a bedroom with her, and he said a boy needs his space. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this fucker, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. Middle school is tough, man. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery, and I had the presentations staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, but most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched like everyone else as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class, who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room, and after a few seconds which seemed to stretch out forever, one of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class as the tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is to this day one of the bravest acts I have ever witnessed. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright. Sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush. "Matthew is my boyfriend," or "let's get married, Julia." They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. I teach 10th graders. When I was student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked, and the students told me a lot of personal stuff, probably because my age made me more approachable to 15 over 16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my classroom at that time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out or tell her about things he was interested in so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend, but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period / their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just C, S, and I in the classroom. C was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shooed S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through her embarrassment, and by the time S got back, C was cool as a freaking cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation, and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. I work in a college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It is painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who is freaking someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. He wasn't even a student, just some fucker who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl who he saw a Jack in the Box a week earlier. Edit. More details on the second story. He comes in and just starts talking to her. I'm in such shock that this guy just randomly walked in. I was speechless and just stood there watching it. After about a minute I came to my senses and realized the situation. Here is this 40+ year old dude, tatted up with his pants hanging from his ass, reacting of booze and cigarettes at 9 AM, hitting on a very uncomfortable looking tiny blonde 18-year-old. I tell him that this is my classroom and that I wouldn't have him interrupting. He would have to go. He didn't put up a fight, just asked when class was over so he could come back to mac him some. I told him we were out at noon. We were really done by 10 and that was the last day of class. The day of the final, a week later, in a different room, I kept my eyes open, but he never showed. I asked the student, but she only knew him from a single instance of standing in line in front of him at Jack in the Box. Awkward story. My students are all between 8 and 10 and a few have noticeably hit the point where they are obviously starting to notice the opposite sex. I have 2 students that I'll give fake names, a boy, James, and a girl, Lucy, in my class. They are always together, recess, lunchtime, free choice, the 2 are always working together. They are both very shy and jiggly, and it seemed a mutual crush was there, noted by me, and their math teacher as well. One day, I hear James getting teased by some other kids for his crush on Lucy, his math teacher, and I pull him aside and have a talk with him. We tell him that we'll be talking with the class as a whole about crushes and teasing. He's not the only one. His math teacher also tells him that if he does have a crush on Lucy, it's nothing to be embarrassed about because she's a nice, sweet girl. James just looks awkward and asks to go, so we let him. A few days later, I'm walking my kids out to the parent pickup, and I see Lucy's dad is here to pick her up. James waves to both of them as they leave, and I ask if he's been over to Lucy's house to play, and if he knows her dad. Yay, miss. That's my uncle. Oh crap. I have encouraged cousin incest. I awkwardly gather my nerves and start to say, you remember that talk we had about Lucy and liking her? Well, I didn't realize she was your cousin so. I thought you didn't. That was weird, miss. Then he just laughed and said he liked a different girl anyway from his older sister's class. Actually watched 2 students fall in love. I was a class tutor for 1 semester at my university, which is basically the pity job they give you if you're carrying on your education and are too poor to eat every day. Music and popular culture, which sounds more exciting than it was, but it was still a fun little unit to do. I only had about 17 people in my toot, most younger but some older than me. They were great, knew I'd never done it before, and we each made sure everyone got through it. The discussions were lively and nice, and everyone chipped in. One guy, I'll call Jim, was pretty musical and outspoken, and he always seemed to be particular about arguing with another guy in the class. I'll call him Joe. Joe was also musical, but one of the quiet and shy types. Dragging a strong opinion out of Joe could be difficult, but Jim always seemed to be able to press the right buttons and fire him up. Thank God for Jim. There's nothing worse than a dead quiet discussion. Student presentations come around, and Jim is doing his on how relevant music theory is to the average musician. It's all about tacit knowledge and the mystique of being able to claim you can't read music while delivering a stellar performance and whatnot. Class discussion opens up and finally, Jim and Joe are agreed on something. It was a bit of a laugh around the room. Life went on. A few classes later, and I can't remember how it even came up, but we were talking about representation in music. Mostly about Paul Simon and his world music phase. Was world music a good way to categorize music? Blah blah. The topic of gay musicians come up, and we are talking about that, how ambiguity reigns in a lot of musicians, and how image feeds into that. Jim pipes up and says image isn't a great indicator, because people are always surprised to find out he's gay when he doesn't come across that way. Everyone waits for Joe to fire back, but he laughs and says, yeah, same for me. It was a bit of a surprise, not that it matters. I'm gay myself, and only suspected Jim, definitely not Joe. The next class, Joe and Jim are sitting together and arguing as much as ever. I ran into them in the uni coffee shop sitting together and chatting. By the end of the semester they were holding hands as they left the toot. I imagine they are still together, trying to make a living off their music, but that's just the romantic in me. When I look back on it, it was so obvious from the very first lesson. Sickly how cute they were together, but still. I was only 23 at the time and not quite so jaded and bitter as I'm now, so it was a nice thing to have happen. I never did any more tutoring after that. I pulled out of the honors course altogether, so it is my only story. I wasn't a teacher, I was a teaching helper. I mean, it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head whilst fiddling with an object like a pencil or their hair. The quick look away when the crush looks at them. It's easy. Sorry for question mark at first I'm German and didn't know how to teaching helper correctly to say it. If anyone knows, please comment or message me. Band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blossoming. More often than not it is a good thing, but every now and then you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy does it turn ugly quick. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest, most shocking moment. A girl who is an awesome student has been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching kids practice. This sweet girl comes in the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watch her walk up to said guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something to which he responds with a short answer, but had that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then balls up her fist and socks the guy 4-5 times and storms off. At that point, I realized what she said. Skvangud, you are going to have to write me an office referral. Best referral ever. Teacher of high school freshman here. It's very easy. Saddest story. 2 houses, both alike. Sorry. It was a couple years ago. Girl was quiet, charming, and very bright. Boy was disruptive, but the good kind of disruptive. The pleasure to have in class disruptive. Very funny. It became very clear to me that she was crushing on him something fierce. I, for what it was worth, blessed this potential union. This went on for several months. Then, one day, she storms into my room in a huff, declaring her anger at him. As I'm going around the room later that day, I catch him writing a lengthy letter to her. At a glance, it explained how he thought she was a really nice girl and all, but it would be perhaps best if they remained only friends. I assume she had made a move. It didn't pay off. Over the next few days, I saw more mournful and longing looks than I ever wanted. Each one broke my heart. By the end of the year, they had patched it up, yet I still caught the occasional twinge of sadness in her eye. She may still hope to this day, and I still hope too. Daycare teacher to kids 6 to 11 here. It is probably one of the easiest things to pick up on. They try to play with the other, but they don't openly admit to it. They spend a lot of time near the other without ever actually talking to them. They sit at the same table, but try to talk to different friends. Basically, they spend as much time with the other as possible without actually becoming friends. If anything about crushes is mentioned, they immediately try to direct the conversation, so people talk about them and their crush. And the second the two are mentioned together, the crusher blushes. Not to brag, but I have this 10-year-old that has a pretty obvious crush on me. I mean, I'm a teenage male who spends 20 hours a week with her, so it is entirely understandable. I should mention that I don't encourage it or anything. I treat her like all the others. Granted, she is one of the oldest, so she does have more responsibility, and she is able to have deeper conversations. But she tries to make my life easy. She will help clean, cook and take care of the younger kids. She does it to impress me, and I sincerely appreciate it. I will say again that it is completely normal. I had crushes on babysitters, so do we all. I feel kind of bad for her now, because she puts a lot into it, but I know she'll smile looking back on it as an adult. There is another kid who is 6, maybe 7 now, who has a crush on one of the 9-year-olds. I mean, they are not entirely on the same level mentally. First grade and third grade are about as far apart as third grade and ninth grade. Night and day. So it is kind of sad because he is chasing after her. She knows, I think, about the crush, and it makes her a little uncomfortable, but she is sweet about it. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.